Well, once again, thank you for joining me for part 14 of the 10-year journey to the Great Depression, or through the Great Depression, I should say. At least the Great Depression window. I wanted to look at the monthly model today as we await this August 6th bottom in markets. I think the Fed has the rate decision a couple days from now. And so markets have been nothing but hot. And even my peak was a little early on that. So the July 18th to my first peak was a week early. So markets remain in the roaring 20 phase. And I want to show you the monthly model today and kind of explain some of the historical macro peaks that we've seen in the last 5 years and show you how they developed in the model. And then usually the last peak in the model is the final peak. So thank you for joining me. I'm brschultzSP500, and the Great Depression window, I should say, opens up at the end of 2030. And so that 2031 through 2034 obviously would be roughly a 100-year cycle. It's not always exactly 100 years, right? But it's pretty close. So my target for the S&P 500 by the end of 2030 should be 10,347. Who knows? Maybe we achieve that in the early 2028 peak. Maybe I have to create another extension off that or another prediction. So thank you for joining me. So this is the monthly model. I've updated it with June and July monthly data. And it's a pretty simple graph, right? At the first glance, you think nothing of it, really. But what I did is I zoomed in this time on roughly where we are, the last, 30 years, let's say. And so what's interesting is from the first wave that kind of stands out is the orange trajectory trend line. And that projected that there'd be a major peak in markets end of 2021. And you might think, well, that's pretty interesting, but could it predict the crash that happened in 2025? You can see from the green line, you just bounced off the top of the two black waves from 2015 and 2021. And that gives you a peak at the end of 2024. That was obviously then followed by a big plunge in the market here in 2025. And then the blue trend line you can see runs out into about Q1 of 2028. So I believe that's where another peak will be. Markets, could continue just to run up into that point, and then markets will cool off into late 2028, early 2029. And then you can see from the yellow line, it's the last trend line that I have right now, going out into Labor Day of 2030. So I believe that's where the Great Depression window will begin. I've been saying that for some time. So this monthly model is pretty interesting. For some reason, I used to be able to predict bottoms pretty good, and the last 5 years, I've only been able to predict macro peaks really good. So I don't know why that flip-flopped, and I feel bad about some of my major misses. I've lost money on that as well. I'm missing the bottom. Hopefully some of you that follow my work have listened to others near the bottom, as I failed on the April low. I got too caught up in it. I should have been going long around the 5,000 mark. Instead, I got too emotionally caught up and suffered loss on that. So so waiting for the August drop here, early August bottom in 2025, and then these are the macro peaks that you'll be probably seeing more of the crash wake from, if you will. So again, like at the end of 2021, there was a substantial crash in markets for all of 2022, and then obviously we had a big 20% drop in markets after the peak at the end of 2024. We could have another 20% drop in markets after the peak in early 2028, and then we'll have to see what happens post Labor Day 2030, and again that could go into Christmas 2020 or 2030, and then we could have what I believe will be the Great Depression window. Sometimes you can do wave counts on this. You could say, well, can you do wave counts on your model? 2003-4 would be the bottom, and then you kind of do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which I think some of the Elliott Wave people were trying to do at the end of 2021. And with the pricing side, again, I use wave counts on my models, but I don't use them. My work is not Elliott Wave, so there is a different distinction. But I think that's why people, I think that's why you noticed that the Elliott Wavers were saying that we were at the final peak at the end of 2021. I think Avi Gilburt said that it's the final. Then we would have a decade of a lost decade after that, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me per se, but I remember him saying that he thought markets were at the end of Elliott Wave's 5 of 5 or something around 2021, and he thought markets were not gonna perform very well over the next decade or something. I think I read somewhere something about a lost decade. So I don't have the article, so please don't quote me. But then Avi Gilbert kind of disappeared, because I believe if you look at this wave count, I'm guessing it's similar to what the Elliott Wave was seeing. It's a very simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from roughly the 2003 low on a very macro scale, right? So I think that's where you'll see that. But you might say, well, so your black wave, when it pulls back up into late 2030, could it be like a straight shot? Meaning that would be like a decline wave of some sort? Yes. I mean, this could be like a wave 1 decline on a macro scale, so to speak, in the model. I'm not talking about pricing, I'm talking about the model. And then we could double top on the black wave at the end of 2030. That'd be wave, basically kind of like a wave 1 down, 2 up, and then 3 down would be your Great Depression. So we might already be seeing the Great Depression form, so to speak, in the model. Because again, let's say if you're following me, we have 5 waves here up from 2003 on a macro scale into late 2021, correct? Okay, you can see that. So basically on a macro scale in this model, so this is how I understand markets to work, and I think if this is accurate and this works out, the reason why Elliott Wave doesn't work is because it doesn't have this nuance to it. So in theory, on this type of model, you could have the black wave pull all the way down to the center of the graph and then pull all the way back up roughly to where it peaked in 2021. So form like a double top, if you will, right? So you'd have your 5 waves up until late 2021, but then you'd have an exhaustion wave into, let's say, end of 2024 in the model again, in the model, not in pricing, in the model. And then the model, then pricing, skyrockets into the end of 2030, the end of the decade, so to speak. That brings the black wave all the way back up to where it peaked out at the end of 2021 for wave 1 down, 2 up, okay? So then the black wave would crest again around the end of 2030. And again, that'd be wave 1 down, 2 up into 2030. And then wave 3 down, which is the heaviest and the strongest crash in the markets, right, would be your 2031 through 2034. So again, we could already be seeing the setup for the crash into the end of 2034, mid-2034. Because again, if you think about it, in the modeling perspective alone, we're completing wave 1 down, so to speak, in the model, right? Wave 2 up into the end of the decade, and then down into 2034. So you need 2031 through 2034 to be wave 3 down, because that's the most powerful wave. Again, I'm not speaking in terms of Elliott Wave, I'm just speaking in terms of market. Now you might say I'm borrowing it from Elliot Wave. I don't know. I do believe that markets do work in like a 5-wave sequence the majority of the time and have an exhaustion wave. So I don't know if that makes me. I do think there are valuable points to some of the Elliot Wave rules or the system. But if you look at this model on a monthly scale, again, this is the macro view of the markets. I think that's why it's hidden from the pricing side. So it's more of a momentum 5 waves, if you will. So again, you have a double peak in the momentum into late 2030, and then you have the full exhaustion collapse of markets into late 2034. And I think that's where Elliot Wave is missing the picture, the big picture, if this does work out as I see it. And again, we'd already be creating the collapse in the Great Depression right now, right? So at the end of 2021, essentially in momentum speak, we're already trying to create the Great Depression right here. And so what's interesting, obviously, is President Trump is cutting taxes and doing all these things that are very good economically, right? But it will have this very same effect as the Roaring 20s. And so the question really becomes what happens after the end of 2030. Because if this really is the end of wave 2 at the end of 2030 on a macro scale, that's where all the fear comes in the market in the new decade. And those of you who are firm believers that there's 5 waves to markets, and then you can have like a 3-wave down, right? Most of the Elliott Wave people would agree you can have like a three waves down, okay? So again, in my model's sequence, you'd have wave 1 and 2 complete, wave 1 down and 2 up complete of a 3-wave move down. By the end of 2034, we're already seeing that happen. So I know I've said it a few times now, but I want to really bring it out in case it really is true. Down the road, maybe you can come back and revisit this video if things unfold. But again, I think that the Great Depression movement on the macro scale is already set, right? I think Jerome Powell was very instrumental in making sure that this was all set up, and I think he is just feathering it now until the Great Depression unfolds. And so that's basically my viewpoint from this point. So hopefully it makes sense to some people, but this again is the macro scale, and it's the best way I can explain why the Great Depression would be coming, if it does come, right? You'd need to see it on a yearly basis or a quarterly basis setting up years prior to the Great Depression actually unfolding. So you'd hope that some people could explain it or could see it in their modeling or could help explain it. Whereas I think Avi Gilburt, he can't see it in his model because he can't see the wave 1 down and 2 up into 2030. He claims that the pricing peak has already been in and will be in for some long time. And I think that's why he has been so quiet for so long, is because he realizes that his software isn't built to recognize this pattern that my model is I'm guessing picking up at this point. So I'm not trying to put him down. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying I think that's where the blind spot is. And I've been more than blind in a number of my calls, so I don't mean to say anything like that. So, anyways, I don't even know if the mic's on. Again, this is just a snippet of the GoFundMe page. I didn't want you to forget that, so thank you. And please bookmark it, whatever, and watch it over the next decade or into late 2034. Thank you so much.